Civil War is directed by Alex Garland and stars Kirsten Dunst, Kaylee Spaney, Wagner Moura, and among others. And this story is set in pretty much a modern times where you have a civil war that breaks out in the United States, and there's some conflicts that involve where the whole nation is pretty much under war, and the Western forces that are under California and Texas join together, and other nations end up pretty much going to war with each other throughout the country, and it's up to these four photojournalists that are on their way to confront the President of the United States. That's basically the whole general main. That's pretty much the main basics of the plot, because the movie does keep some vague stuff, not really exploring too much with the actual war of what all started. And so that's there's not really much to go into detail in the rest of it, because it really is a straightforward. It becomes pretty much a road trip type of movie where the four are on their way pretty much trying to evade all the chaos surrounding the nation. Now, here's a little backstory. Now, this movie was directed by Alex Garland, who I've really admired as a filmmaker and also as a writer. He got his start when he was writing with Danny Boyle on 28 Days Later, which I really love. And then he later moved on to other works, including he was involved with the writing of Dread, which I really loved. And then he got his big break when he directed Ex Machina, which to this day I still haven't seen, but I've heard it's really good. But I did eventually get to see Annihilation, which I really loved. And I did also see his other film that he did a couple years ago called Men, which I wasn't too big on. But the guy definitely knows his talent, especially on a visual level and as a screenwriter. And going into this movie, it was one of those kind of movies that I was curious about, but I also heard that there was some controversy kind of surrounding it, because in a way the movie is essentially, taking place in modern times, and right now, with it coming out with the election this year and everything, and I'm not going to go into politics or anything because that's not what I do on my channel, but I could definitely see the timing that of this movie coming out in this current times, that it could definitely see some very divisive of people that are willing to see what it was trying to do, especially if it was meant to be on a political side or what it was really trying to say. And so, after upon seeing the film, I can say that this was definitely one of the most intense and most one of the probably most grounded and to a certain extent very realistic war films that I've ever seen in my life. It's certainly one that is a little different compared to a lot of other war films I've seen in certain regards, but it definitely keeps it grounded into a point where it does pretty much mirror what's going on, what would happen if this was something that was going on in real life, so to speak. And now, to get my pros out of the way, I thought that the cast in this were all phenomenal. Kirsten Dunst, I really love as an actress, especially for in the early stuff that she did, especially the Spider-Man movies and other stuff like Jumanji, and her later work where she worked on stuff like Eternal Sunshine and Fargo Season 2 I really enjoyed. And funny enough, that's actually where she met her future husband, Jesse Plemons, who's also in this movie too. And I'll get to him in a little bit because he definitely steals the show in one particular scene. But the rest of the cast I thought were great too. You got Kaylee Spaney, who is really becoming a really great actress in her own right, especially starring in movies like Bad Times, The El Royale. And she's also got the upcoming Alien Romulus that I'm curious about. But I'm still keeping it kind of open-minded. But she was also great, and then it was also great seeing Jesse Plemons in the role like this, because, like you see from the trailer, he's playing I don't know if it's not really established whether or not if he's really in the military or if he's actually someone who just happens to be carrying a rifle, or carrying a military uniform, or whatever. But his scene alone was really one of the most intense and gave me in most shocking parts of the film that really got to me, and it really had me on the edge where I was feeling major anxiety. I can really say that a lot about the rest of this movie, is that it really takes a lot of what is shown as war as a tragedy, because it's not really meant trying to pick a side for either kind of political aspect or anything, because the way that the story plays out, it's keeping details very vague, where it's just more about having to survive the war itself and showing a lot of what happens when photojournalists are trying to, take pictures and do what they do best and document the story and everything. And that's what the movie does really surround itself with, progressing with the characters, because even though there's not really a whole lot of backstory too much given for some of the characters' backgrounds and everything, we still get to follow them as the movie progresses, because when it's on this road trip that it takes place throughout the course of the story, I still felt for them, and I still felt like, the movie is not really trying to pick a side of whether they're good or bad. It has a kind of a nuanced level to them, and especially with Kaylee Spaney's character, who idolizes Kirsten Dunst, who's been through hell, and she's seen everything on the front lines, and even it comes to a point where even she is, is getting to the point where she feels kind of like sick from seeing certain things and all that, and there's just so much that there's layers to the characters that they do, but they don't go into full established because they're trying to keep it still very subtle the way things play out. But the rest of the story, the way that it was able to still capture all the macabre of seeing the really grisly stuff that happens, especially seeing dead bodies hanging and seeing like a lot of grim imagery where forests are on fire and stuff. It's what you would call a beautiful disaster, where Alex Garland is trying to capture of what it would be like if you put the perspective instead of the soldiers and put it with photojournalists. Like, imagine taking Full Metal Jacket, and imagine that Joker in that movie is just not even a soldier, but he's more of a journalist. That's pretty much what I was getting vibes with this one. And I was also getting some vibes of other stuff I've seen, like The Last of Us and even 28 Days Later, except just take the zombies out, and it has a very similar feeling. That very dread and very unsettling feeling where anything can really happen out of the blue. And there's a lot of stuff that really goes down, especially toward the end, that I was just like really like on the edge of my seat for the whole time. And another aspect I got to really enjoy with this as well is the cinematography that I've already said, but also the sound editing. If this movie gets nominated next year, this is definitely going to go down as one of my favorites of the year that has some of the best gunshot sounds in a war type of movie, because just the timing of it, where you're just hearing photographs that are taking place and you're just hearing the snaps going off. You don't hear anything else but just the snaps. That's really unsettling in its own right, but it really puts you in that kind of atmosphere. And the score itself and the music timing as well, it's like it really makes you feel like you're on this whole journey with them, and it just keeps on going and going, and it doesn't stop with doing any kind of intensity. And then when it gets to the climax, things really go down, because while the movie is only made for about $50 million, they definitely use the budget pretty well throughout the film, but especially toward when we get to the Washington, D.C. stuff. I'm not going to go spoilers, but man, shit really goes down, and you start to see a lot of stuff that is, if you see this on IMAX, you can definitely see the scope that it goes with, because they really showcase a lot of the epic scale that the movie was really going for, and a lot of the war-torn, a lot of the action sequences that are taking place in this, and it gets to a point where things are, all bets are off, especially toward the end of it. Now, if I'm going to get into any kind of little cons, what I'll have to say is that there's this part that happens where after the events that take place in Charlottesville, we immediately cut right into the final climax of Washington, D.C. And that's not going to, I'm not going to go into spoilers or anything, but it really feels like there's a gap right there that seems like the movie could have went on longer with. And I think if you would have added maybe a little like 10 or 20 minutes extra, you really could have got to see a lot more of the build-up that could have surrounded Washington, D.C., and you could have really got to see a lot more intensity of stuff that we were already getting previously in the film. There is like at least a musical cue that's also in the film that I found myself kind of question, like in the movie, that kind of felt a little kind of out of place, but at the same time I think maybe that was the intention, because it was trying to put you in that very, kind of atmosphere that characters can be very nonchalant about certain things, and that is a big recurring thing that happens in the movie as well. So there's that. And then I will say too, there's also something that happens toward the end that I did kind of find myself questioning the longevity behind it at the very end of it, and it works to its advantage, but at the same time it does feel like it goes a little unrealistic, but I'll leave it there. It's just something that happens right before the movie ends, and so that's just my only minor concept, because other than that, I still found myself really enjoying this movie a lot, and it's definitely one that I could see the divisiveness that it has with people that are expecting it to be one of those whether it's trying to side on certain things, but it really is just showing that war is hell, and it shows it as a tragedy, and that, you know, if this was to happen in real life, it's mirroring what would be if you were in that kind of situation, which I really admire on that aspect. And so with that, I'm going to give the movie a low phenomenal grade on the Film Freaks meter. This will definitely still be on one of my top favorites of the year. So for those of you who have also seen Civil War, let me know in the comments below what you thought about it, and thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next review. I'll see you later.